Hey everybody, welcome back to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. Ethan here. So today I have a bit of a different episode to share with you. What I'm sharing with you here today is a snippet of a live workshop that I recorded with a group of leaders from a variety of different organizations several months ago. So these leaders, they attended our signature leadership development series online, and this series is called, Managing with Mind and Heart. Go figure. This online workshop series is something that we hold several times a year for any leaders from any place to sign up for. And so again, I'm going to share with you a snippet of this workshop today. And over the next several weeks and months, I'm going to continue to share more snippets of this workshop. So I hope you enjoy what you're listening to. And by the way, if you're maybe interested in signing up to attend our Managing with Mind and Heart workshop series online, would love to have you there. Go ahead and just go to our website, nashconsulting.com. And if you hover over the offerings tab, you'll see a button that says Managing with Mind and Heart Online Experience. This is always a fun time. We love holding these workshops online. Again, just leaders coming from all different walks of life, some brand new leaders, some that have been managers for many years, and they bring so much wisdom to the table, and it is always an awesome time. So hope you'll consider signing up and enjoy the episode today. Oh, and by the way, we've edited out any voices or comments from any of the participants in the workshop. So you'll just hear me talking. You're not going to hear any of the interaction or questions or group work that happens all throughout this workshop series. All right, enjoy. All right, so I'm going to briefly walk through the other 14 top 15 management skills. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one because we're going to cover them throughout our time together. A lot of these skills that we'll talk about, these other 14 skills, are actually some of the skills that you've attributed to showing care and respect. Right? So again, care and respect is kind of the overarching skill here. But number 2 is advocating for your employees. Now, this can be a bit of a tricky tango, because in a leadership role, in a management role, you need to advocate for your employees and you need to advocate for the organization at the same time because you're a representative of the organization. So it can be a bit of a balancing act there. Right? But you have to demonstrate to your people that you have their backs and you have the organization's back at the same time. Right? That means you don't get to badmouth the company or other leaders to your employees. But advocating for your employees. So number 3, communicate. Now, would it surprise you that most of the time when we do assessment work or surveys, that one of the top gaps that we hear from employees is communication? Almost every time we hear we need more communication. And then when we ask managers and leaders, oftentimes they say we're communicating well. And I don't think either are wrong. I think there is just a disconnect with what people need for communication. Number 4. It's about being fair and equitable. Right? Motivation research shows that one of the biggest motivation killers is a perceived sense of unfairness. Okay? And what I like to tell leaders is that it's not a matter of whether you are being unfair or not. Perception really matters here. And does being fair and equitable mean we treat everybody the same? Not necessarily. It means you look at each person as an individual with individual needs and circumstances, and you tailor your approach to them, right? Within reason. Number 5, involve other people in decision-making. So again, a preview of something we'll cover later in the series here, but there are 6 different ways to make decisions that we're going to cover. 2 of those ways are very collaborative. 2 of those ways, as a manager, you decide for yourself. And the last 2 are different, kind of a combination of the 2. When we ask people what they want most in the workplace, one of the top answers is a sense of being in on things, meaning having a voice in decisions that are going to affect them. By the way, having a voice is not always the same thing as having a vote, right? And we'll get to that. All right, number 6, give people autonomy and trust. And when you give people autonomy and trust, you get this really cool thing called ownership. And again, back to what motivates people. Autonomy is one of the main drivers of motivation here. Right? Ask for and be open to feedback. Now think back to Johari's window for a moment here. Remember, we don't know what we don't know. And by the way, why do we want people to give us feedback? Helps us with our own personal growth, right? Shows that we're open and approachable. We don't know, despite popular belief as managers, we don't know everything that we need to know, right? So we rely on our team to have some feedback loops here, some communication channels. Right. All right, deal with problems and concerns, meaning fix issues. Surprisingly, this is one of the reasons people think they have a manager, is to help take care of some of the roadblocks. Right? One of the biggest reasons for negativity in the workplace is that there are things that just aren't getting fixed. So deal with problems and concerns. Be approachable. Talk about a concept called the power differential, but whether you believe it or not, there's a felt difference of power and authority between you and your employees. Right? And so there has to be some level of psychological safety between you and your team. You have to be approachable or people aren't going to bring their best selves. Number 10, give recognition and thanks. This is not going to surprise anybody, so I won't say anything more about this one. We get it. Hold people accountable. Right? What you allow, you teach. We'll be covering this throughout the series as well. Number 12, be available and responsive. What might this mean? It might mean MBWA. You heard that before? Managed by walking around. Now, it doesn't work in a remote environment the same way, does it? Number 13 is follow through and follow up. This was mentioned already, but do what you say you're going to do, right? Don't overpromise and underdeliver. One of the quickest ways to lose trust is to do that overpromising and underdelivering. Number 14, make your expectations clear. Be clear about what you need, what you want, what's expected of everybody. And the more clear you are about your expectations, the less you have to micromanage. That's the cool thing about that. And the easier it is to have feedback and accountability conversations because it becomes less subjective. Make your expectations clear. And number 15, last but not least, is provide resources and training. Set your people up for success. Equip them with the tools and resources they need to do their job. A side tangent on this one, literature finds that when there's a performance issue, and we're trying to understand the root cause of a performance issue with an employee, most people tend to go to what is it about that individual that's causing this performance issue? I mean, what is it about their motivations, their motives, their capabilities, their skills that is causing this performance issue? But as we start to dig into systems thinking, what we find is that roughly about 75% of performance issues are due to factors within the environment, not within the individual. Meaning tools and resources that are missing, right? Training that people need that they're just not getting, or even expectations that they don't have. So those are your top 15 management skills. All you need to know, right? So back to our 6 game changers. We're all the way to number 4 now, which is that managing people involves a specific set of deliverables. Those deliverables are the top 15 management skills. So I know that's a bit of a kind of fire hose with, 15 skills. It's always a bit overwhelming. Don't worry, we're going to cover each one of these in a variety of different ways, and you'll start to see how the different skills connect with each other. So again, managing people involves a specific set of deliverables, the top 15 management skills. Just remember that the Peter Principle is a thing. There's no shame in it. It just happens. But if leaders can learn to deliver on these top 15 skills and keep leadership skills as their North Star in their position, it changes that. Right? And we've seen it time and time again. what I've found to work pretty well for me most of the time is because I've been in the same position where I don't really know what feedback to provide, uh,
Hmm.
because everybody really is doing great.
Exactly.
Hey, what areas of your job would you like to receive some more feedback on? And I often find that, oh, they want, some surprising things. And so I can focus in on those areas, right? And the other thing is
Great
just
input.
relating back to expectations. It's like, just ask the question. Do you feel like the expectations are clear for you? Right. And a litmus test for that could also be, do you find yourself needing to hold people accountable for things that they didn't know they needed to be accountable for?
Yep.
Right. That could be a sign of, hey, expectations might need to be set.
Hmm.
All right. Awesome conversation. We're not going to do this part here for the sake of time. All right. So here's how this works. There are three types of skills. I'm making this in super simplistic terms here, of course. One type of skill at the top of our triangle here, these are what we call job specific skills. Pretty self explanatory, right? These are the type of skills that you probably had in your job description, the type of skills that if you were to change careers, you probably wouldn't bring these skills with you. Job specific, the ability to read a meter, for example, to give an IV, right? Play the piano, job specific skills. The next skill, transferable skills. So, kind of the opposite. These are the type of skills that if you were to change jobs or careers, you can bring some of these skills with you. Delegation skills, computer skills, management skills in general. I can take those from to a lot of different careers. I think we would all agree that transferable skills are really important for us to focus on throughout our career development, right? As the economy changes, technologies change, we want to have transferable skills. Now, at the bottom of our pyramid here, that takes up, as you can see, more than 50% of our real estate, these are what we call adaptive skills. So these are the skills that we brought with us from childhood that impact our success in almost every area of our lives. I'll put this in a different ways. The skills we brought with us from childhood that make or break our success in almost every aspect of our lives. Okay? The way we show up, the way we treat people, the way we impact others, how we respond and react to our own stress or other people's stress, right? How we make people feel. These skills impact almost everything we do, and they're always in play, right? They're in play in our relationships with our employees, with our managers, with our customers, children, family. They're always in play. And the good news here is that you're not stuck, right? We'll learn to work on some of these adaptive skills. So again, the skills that will make or break our success in almost every aspect of our lives. And these are the most important skills for work and life. And I'm going to do my best to try to prove that to you. All right. Let's think of a few specific adaptive skills here. So how about this one? Because we've sort of around it a couple times. How about the ability to receive feedback non-defensively? Right? So if I work up the guts to give you feedback on something that's important to me, and you punish me by getting defensive, what am I going to do differently next time? I'm not going to do that again, right? I'm not going to touch that hot stove again, right? Because why would I? It takes courage to give someone some hard feedback, and you've punished me by getting defensive. And so if we go throughout our life getting defensive when people give us feedback, we're going to become unapproachable, right? And we're going to shut down that channel of communication. It's going to be hard for us to learn to grow and improve. All right. And we can't afford to be unapproachable, especially with the people we manage. Right? So this adaptive skill, the ability to receive feedback non-defensively, is so critical. And yet it is a really hard one to master. And that might not surprise some of you. And I'll tell you why it's hard to master. And I'm going to take a roundabout way to do this. But so they did this study. Some of you might have heard of this study before. But essentially what they did is they kind of hooked people up into what I suppose would be like an fMRI scanner. Those of you in the medical field will probably be able to know what I'm talking about more than I do. But they're basically measuring blood flow to different regions of the brain. And they take these participants and they put them in a virtual reality simulator. And in this virtual reality simulator, they have them walking down a dark alleyway at night. And as they're walking down this dark alleyway at night, they hear footsteps behind them, right? Boop, boop, boop. Footsteps. Okay? Right there in that moment where they hear those footsteps behind them in the dark alleyway, they see extra blood flow to the region of the brain called the amygdala, right? Which is one of its mechanisms is it's the fear center of the brain. So in a sense, in real time, they are seeing fear. Now they take these same participants and they take them out of the virtual reality simulator and they have one of the researchers come up to them and say, hey, I have some hard feedback to give you about how you did in that experiment. And guess what they saw in the brain? The exact same thing. Extra blood flow to the amygdala. Folks, in the first microseconds, your brain cannot tell the difference between physical danger and social danger. Our brains, once again, are wired for safety. And so, in a sense, getting defensive when someone gives you feedback is a safety mechanism, right? It's you responding to that fear. So this is why it is a really hard skill to learn, because we will feel defensive when someone gives us hard feedback. So the adaptive skill here is feeling defensive and then still being able to show up non-defensively when someone gives you feedback. Now, would we also agree that receiving feedback non-defensive is really important in our personal relationships as well? Anybody ever had to get some hard feedback from a partner or spouse? Have you ever got defensive? So the skill is always in play. All right. Let's take another adaptive skill here. How about the ability to give feedback in a way that communicates clearly and is designed to reduce the other person's defensiveness? So giving feedback with clarity and kindness at the same time. Critical adaptive skill. How about the ability to listen? This came up a few times. To listen so other people feel heard and feel respected. Another really critical adaptive skill. Now, would we also agree that not every adult brought that skill with them from childhood? The ability to listen with care and respect. Yet a super critical skill for any job that requires human contact. You might have the best world-class job-specific skills, but people don't feel respected by you because you don't listen with care and respect. You get defensive when they give you feedback. You have a hard time giving other people feedback without damaging the relationship. It's going to be hard to be successful despite your world-class job-specific skills. Okay. So these three adaptive skills that I've listed, receiving feedback non-defensively, giving feedback with clarity and kindness, and listening with care and respect, we call these a trifecta of adaptive skills. Always in play, impact every aspect of our lives. And not everybody in this Zoom room has all these skills mastered. And that's okay. Right? That's why we're here at some level. These adaptive skills, these are closely related to emotional IQ. So the definition of emotional IQ here, all right, the ability to identify one's own and others' emotions and then make good choices based on that information. So adaptive skills are those good choices we make. So you think about it this one. Your emotional IQ, once again, is your ability to identify what I am feeling or experiencing in any given moment and to make a good hypothesis of what other people might be feeling or experiencing in any moment. Because we can't actually know, right? What am I feeling? What might other people be feeling? And then your adaptive skills are the behaviors you engage in based on that information. And then which one do you think is more important for our long-term success in life? Our IQ or emotional IQ? Yeah, I know it's a bit of a leading question. Not even close, right? Most experts put the ratio at about 70-30 in favor of EQ. And that's good news And here's another leading question, because guess which one we can do something about. Our EQ. Let's talk about the path to growing adaptive skills. Okay? When you want to grow in a specific adaptive skill, you're going to want to focus your energy in two different places. You're going to want to focus your energy on the behavioral side of things. So we call this the external piece. Right? These are, again, physical behaviors, right? Things that can be seen and heard by another person. So again, I've identified an adaptive skill I want to work on. I have to learn the behaviors to practice that skill. And at the same time, we're working on the mind and heart piece, okay? The internal piece. This is what's going on inside you. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? This is about working on changing your relationship, your mindset in regards to this particular adaptive skill. So two-part journey. External, let's focus there. Internal, let's focus there as well. All right. So with the behavioral component of it, we break this into 3 different steps. Step number 1 is we break that skill down into its component parts. Right? To practice that skill, I actually have to know what to practice. So as an example, if I want to learn to respond non-defensively when someone is giving me feedback, what are some observable behaviors that I can engage in when someone is giving me that feedback? What behaviors would demonstrate non-defensiveness? Body language. And of course, we can probably break that down to be more specific with that body language. Nodding your head. It's one thing to say, hey, I need you to start being less defensive when you get feedback. That's not necessarily helpful feedback if this isn't already adaptive skill that you know how to do well. But to say, hey, let's break this down into actual skills and behaviors. That's actionable, right? So we break the skill down. The second piece here is we practice those behaviors over and over again. If this adaptive skill is not already your default mode, it's not something you brought with you from childhood, it takes more than just understanding the behaviors. It takes practice, and we get that. Right? And what happens when I practice those behaviors over and over again? Our brain actually changes. Right? It's called neuroplasticity. In simplistic terms, neuroplasticity is essentially the strengthening of neural connections, the weakening of neural connections, or in some, the addition of new neural connections, which they call neurogenesis. But what we know is that as we continue to focus in and practice a skill or behavior, it starts to change our brain. So it starts to settle in. Folks, you might be thinking at this point, hey, why are we spending so much time talking about this stuff? And of course, I want to bring you back to a foundational piece, right? Which is about growth and development as a leader, right? And when I was talking about the Johari's window piece earlier and saying, hey, we need to keep an eye on our blind spots, right? I'm mostly talking about these type of skills, right? Adaptive skills here, right? And so, again, we break the skill down into its component parts. We practice those behaviors over and over again. So we start to that neuroplasticity thing. And the third step we take is we got to give ourselves a whole lot of self-compassion along the way. And so why this piece is so important is that there's actually a lot of research on self-compassion now. And what we find is that when we give ourselves some grace, right? Forgive ourselves for a mistake or setback, right? When we treat ourselves like we would a close friend that's going through a failure, right? We're much more easily and able to get into a growth mindset, right? But when we have that internal dialogue that's kind of just beating yourself up about that failure, like, oh, I'm so stupid. How could I do that again? I'm such an idiot, right? That actually results in things like denial, and those people tend to improve less quickly or get to where they need to go. Now, self-compassion, I mean, it's probably an adaptive skill in and of itself, right? And I find that most people, our default mode is to have that kind of not so nice voice in our head about failures. I think that's our default mode about as humans. And so the practice here is really to work against that, and think to ourselves, once again, how would I talk to a close friend or family member that's going through this setback? Would I say, you're such an idiot, you're so stupid, how could you do that again? Probably not, right? They probably wouldn't be your friend if that's the case, right? And so why don't we turn that onto ourselves as well, right? All right, folks. So that's the behavioral side of this. That's the external piece. Now, what for the internal piece, again, because you're working on the external and the internal at the same time, for each adaptive skills you want to improve, we want to find the mindset, the attitude, the internal work that's going to support that skill. So let's come back to our example here. I want to learn to receive feedback non-defensively. What are some mindsets or attitudes I might start practicing or adopting to help change my relationship to negative feedback? Right? So the behaviors, yeah, put on the behaviors, right? But if I want to change how I experience negative feedback over time, what are some of those mindsets or attitudes I could practice? Being curious about everything you hear, right? So if I approach it both with the curiosity and recognizing this is one person's subjective perspective, right? That might free me up to just be able to listen and then make a choice about it, right? So again, the internal piece comes from different exercises, mindsets, attitudes that are training our brain to change our relationship to that experience, to that particular adaptive skill. What I often find is that some of these mindsets here, they're the mindset that underpins many different adaptive skills. Now, if I could add accepting that I don't have all the answers, right? And realizing that hey, I can be confident that I have the skills and the team around me to do what we need to do, and I don't have to have all the answers, right? That's not my job to have all the answers. Good. Good. And then identify an area in which you have a fixed mindset, right? So in order to engage in growth mindset activities, where do I have a fixed mindset, right? Because growth mindset and fixed mindset, it's not like we only have one or we only have the other, right? There are areas in our life in which we have a growth mindset, and there are areas in our life in which we have a fixed mindset. Growth mindset being I can grow, I can improve, I can change. I'm not stuck with the traits and skills and abilities I have. Fixed being this is just kind of how I am, right? And I'm not going to change. And if we could even go a little bit deeper on this one, how might we identify where we have a fixed mindset in our work, in our lives, and so on and so forth? How could we recognize signs of that? Being open to that feedback. Good. And I think one thing we're circling around here, folks, is just, and maybe this is an adaptive skill in and of itself, as well as just an emotional IQ skill, is just, self-awareness, right? And that takes concerted effort to be self-aware, right? To look for patterns, to look for feedback, to identify feedback that might not have been framed as feedback, right? So I won't belabor this any longer. I think we get what we're getting at here, which is we have to be able to uncover some of our blind spots, of course, especially around adaptive skills. And to grow and improve in an adaptive skill, it's breaking that skill down into its behaviors, of course, and practicing them over and over again. But if we really want it to stick, we really want it to be sustained, we have to identify the mindsets and attitudes around that adaptive skill as well. So anytime we are working on developing adaptive skills or a specific adaptive skill, we tend to go through these 4 stages of adaptive skill development. So the first stage we go through is what we call the unconscious incompetent stage. And this is where I don't even know that I have a gap in this adaptive skill, right? I don't even know I'm bad at this particular skill. Okay? This mirrors that Johari's Windows kind of blind spot. I don't know what I don't know about how I'm showing up and impacting those around me. Okay? So I'll give an example for myself. One of the skills that I did not bring with me from childhood into my adult life and my career was the ability to handle my own emotionality without it kind of leaking out on everybody around me. So if I was frustrated at somebody, even if I thought I wasn't showing it, they could tell. Right? If I was excited, they could tell. If I was annoyed, they could just tell. And the funny thing was, well, it wasn't funny at the time, but the funny thing was, I had no idea this was going on. My self-image was actually, I'm a fairly kind of stoic person, right? I keep my emotions to myself. All right, that wasn't true. So here's what happened. I started getting some hard feedback in my professional life and in my personal life. People sharing the impact I'm having on them. So then we can get to this stage, which is called the conscious incompetence stage, where you now know that you don't know how to do something pretty well. You now know that you, let me back up. You know that you don't know how to do a thing, right? You recognize it and you don't really know what to do about it, right? So again, handling my own emotionality, I had no idea what was going on. I started getting some feedback. And when I started getting this feedback, my self-dialogue was a little bit like this. It was like, oh man, this is super embarrassing. Like I can't imagine how many toes I've stepped on throughout my life and my career so far, right? How many relationships I've damaged. And this is really hard for me to wrap my head that I've been having this negative impact on people. And you know what? My Ethan negativity bucket is already all the way full. So you know what I did? I went back to the first stage because ignorance is bliss. And what do we call that? We go from that stage back to the first stage. Avoidance, regression, denial. I call it denial. We've all done it. And we don't even know we've done it. That's kind of the point. Right? Now, if I get to this stage and it's like, okay, I'm not good with my emotions, they spill out on everybody around me, but I'm practicing some self-compassion here. And I say, hey, you know what? Nobody's perfect. Hey, we all have things to work on. I have many wonderful qualities about me. This might not be one right now, but I have many wonderful qualities about me. And so, you know what? I can wrap my head around this. I can take this on as a growth opportunity. And again, that's the cool thing about self-compassion. It gives us the capacity to wrap our heads around what we need to improve in. And when we can do that, we can start to move to the third stage, called the conscious competence stage. This is where you now know how to do the thing. And it just takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of practice. So that's why we call this the work stage. This is the stage where we take that skill we're trying to improve in and we break it down into its component parts so we can start practicing that skill. So because I'm sharing so much about myself today, I'll give you one more example for myself. Another skill that I did not bring with me from childhood was the ability to listen so people felt heard and respected. Right? Like I would listen to you, but I was the kind of listener that's like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to finish the sentence for you because you're taking forever and I already know what you're going to say and I'm going to save us all a lot of time if I just finish this for you. That was my kind of listening. Right? But I've worked on it. I've gotten better. I'm not perfect at this. And my team would tell you that, but I've gotten better. Right? So my question for you is that imagine you and I sat down to have lunch together and you had something really important that you wanted to share with me. And at the end of that lunch together, you thought to yourself, wow, Ethan is a really good listener. I feel heard. I felt respected. So the question for you to answer in your small groups is, what did you see me doing that gave you that impression? What were the behaviors I engaged in that made you feel heard and respected throughout that conversation? Let's start with something basic, but actually really important here. Like, why is it important that managers learn this skill? Slightly a review of what we discussed, but humor me here. Listening with care and respect shows compassion towards others. I love that. Yeah, morale. Back to the morale conversation, right? People to feel heard by others, especially by their manager. Sense of belonging and appreciation. Look, the punchline here, and to come back to some of our top 15 management skills, and really skill number one, is that listening feels like caring. Right? And remember that psychological contract. Care and respect shows up as an investment to those around you. And when I see that you're investing in me, I'm more likely to invest back in you by volunteering my heart and my brain to the work, to the team. Okay? Now I have to tell you about this quick study because at least I think it's cool. So they did this study where basically they took two groups of adults. And one group of adults, they trained them in best practice listening skills, similar to the ones that we're going to talk about here in a moment. The other group, they didn't train them in any skills. Okay, that was the control group. And so they had these adults go have one-on-one conversations with, I believe it was college students. Okay? So with the group of adults that weren't trained in any listening skills, when they talked to those college students later, they reported out that it was kind of a boring conversation. Nothing eventful about this dialogue. Now, when they talked to the students that came from the group of adults that were trained in the skills, they consistently reported back that, hey, these adults care about me, right? They cared about me. Now, there was nothing different in the content of the conversations between the two. The content was the same. It's about grades, about school, about activities. The only difference was the listening skills. So just remember, listening feels like caring. So let's talk about this adaptive skill. We're going to take the external piece, and then we're also going to take the internal piece. What were some of the listening skills that you felt made you feel heard and respected? First one, body language. Right? This has a few parts to this. Right? For one, eye contact. Right? Staying there with them through some eye contact. Now, side note on this, these are general best practice listening skills within Western society. Right? We all have to use some situational awareness as well. Right? For example, there are cultural differences with eye contact. Right? So it's having the social awareness to recognize, hey, is this eye contact seeming to make somebody uncomfortable, right? Or not? There's also kind of neurodiversity differences as well, right? So just paying attention to the cues, the nonverbal cues. But yeah, eye contact, it can go a long ways, right? And attentive body postures. Again, this can include a head nod when they're talking. Now, of course, all of these can be overdone, right? Like I don't need a bobblehead the whole time, but head nod shows I'm tracking what you're saying. Not necessarily agreeing with what you're saying. That's not what we're talking about, but I'm tracking what you're saying. All right, you mentioned this one, don't interrupt. Here's what we tend to find is that when we're in a conversation, the first time you interrupt me, I kind of flag that as a no big deal, to one off. The second time you interrupt me in that same conversation, I flag that as, okay, red flag, something's wrong here. The third time you interrupt me in that same conversation, it gets coded as an aggression. It's like, oh, I get it. This person thinks they're better than me, right? So not interrupting. The third one here, paraphrasing, just the art of restating, reflecting, understanding, right? Checking for meaning, making sure you're on the same page, right? So what I'm hearing you saying is that you need a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that, right? Again, shows you get the point, shows you're paying attention. And it also gives you the opportunity to correct for misunderstandings, right? Now, I had a friend who I went to lunch with a while back, and apparently he had learned how to paraphrase recently because he was paraphrasing every single thing I said in that conversation. And at one point, I said something like, wow, this is a really good salad. And he goes, so you're saying it's a really good salad? I'm like, yes, I said it's really good salad. I kind of lost it there. I diverted from my best practice listening skills. So again, all of these can be overdone is the point. Number 4, ask questions. You mentioned this one, use prompts. Now I have a buddy who I go skiing with once every winter. And we talk about him the entire time. And why do you think we talk about him the entire time? Because he doesn't ask me any questions. I do all the question asking. Now I keep going once a winter because, you know, he buys the beer and stuff, but generally it doesn't feel like a great relationship. So asking some questions. Number 4, avoid distractions. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Not checking your phone during the conversation. Or if you know you have to check you're on call for work or something, I just like to say, hey, sorry, I got to check this. and kind of communicate what you're doing in that moment, as opposed to just taking it out, putting it back, right? So the empathetic reflection. Now, this one I think is the cool part, folks. This is where you say something like, hey, that must have been really cool for you. Or gosh, I'm sorry, that must have really been difficult for you. So with paraphrasing, you're tracking the content of what they're saying. Here, you're actually tracking what they're experiencing and you're reflecting that back to them. And by the way, when you're talking to somebody who just wants to be heard, all they're looking for is a little bit of what? A little bit of empathy. Number 7, don't make it all about you or mostly about you. All right, so don't make it all about you or mostly about you, right? Oh, I remember when that happened to me. Let me tell you a story about that. Now, I'm not saying to never do that, right? What I'm saying is that when we keep constantly turning the conversation back to us, other people tend not to feel very heard. Number 8 is don't be a chronic fixer. And what do I mean by this one? I mean, don't make it your knee-jerk reaction to solve and try to fix the situation. Now, again, I'm not saying to never try to offer a solution. If you think you have a solution that might be helpful in this scenario, what I might recommend is that you ask permission. Say, hey, I have something that I think could help here. Do you mind if I share that with you? Okay. But constantly trying to fix tends to feel like we're not being very heard. All right. And not everybody wants to be fixed. Some people just want to be heard. All right. And number 9, this one's kind of optional, but check back later. Right? Check back on that conversation. Hey, how did that conversation go with your boss that you were going to have? And what are a couple things you communicate to the other person by checking back later on that conversation you had? I can think of 2 key ones. 2 things you communicate to them by checking back later. That you listened and you cared. Absolutely. Now, a couple questions for you on these 9 listening skills. So again, we were having this lunch together, and say I was doing pretty good at practicing these behaviors. Say I was at like a B or a B+ level. I wasn't perfect, wasn't at an A. Are you still going to feel heard if I'm not at like an A level? No, I think that's one of the points here is that we don't have to be perfect at all this stuff for it to show up well. Now, maybe a deeper question here is, was I really listening? All right, so yeah, I was getting a B+ level, but was I actually listening or was I just putting on the behaviors to make it seem like I was listening, but I wasn't listening at all? And this is maybe the most obvious statement I'll make of the day, but just by doing the behaviors makes you actually do the thing. So I want to be a better listener. By just putting on the behaviors, I actually am a better listener. Because how could I paraphrase? How could I ask questions? Give an empathetic reflection if I wasn't actually listening? All right, another question here, just to keep diving into this. Look, is it possible to listen well to somebody you really don't want to listen to? And I know some of you are thinking, yeah, we're doing it right now. But do we sometimes have to treat somebody respectfully that we don't necessarily respect? Do we sometimes have to treat a patient or a customer or a colleague differently than how we feel about them? I sure hope so, right? And of course you do. You all probably wouldn't have jobs if you didn't do that. You don't have to feel the thing to do the thing. That's one of the main points here, and it's one of the main points about adaptive skills, right? If you only wait until you feel like listening well to practice these behaviors, you're going to be really inconsistent over time. It's okay to just put on the behaviors. But if we're only doing the behaviors and we're also not changing the way we feel about listening, we also might be pretty inconsistent over time. So we're going to work on the internal work as well in a moment here. Now, but what if I really don't want to listen right now? Like you're coming up, you want to talk to me and I don't want to listen. I'm not trying to imply here that anytime somebody wants to talk to you, you have to go into this listening mode. This is obvious, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's totally fine to say, hey, now's not a good time. Can we do this later? What I'm suggesting here is that when you do choose to listen, you're working on some of these behaviors, or you're working on doing it the right way. But again, we sometimes have to listen to people even when we don't want to right now. It's part of being a human. It's part of being a manager. So the bottom line here, folks, is that to actually become a better listener and to be more likely to feel like listening, we have to work on the internal piece as well. We've talked about the behaviors, the things that can be seen and heard by someone else. Now, as you are having a conversation with somebody, what might be some mindsets or attitudes that you're practicing that the other person can't see you doing? Or mindsets and attitudes that you reflect on prior to going in that conversation to really help you become a better listener. So, internal work here. I'm going to share 4 that I have for you. Again, these aren't the right answers. These are some things for you to consider. These are what have seemed to work for me and some of the people that I work with in life. So the first one I have for you is listening to understand, not to reply. Now, I think it's natural for us to be in a conversation and already be thinking about what am I going to say next, right? But we don't fully know where the other person is going with the conversation. So this is approaching a conversation with the mindset of, hey, you know what? I don't need to respond in a certain way. And when I can embrace that, I find that it actually frees me up to listen, which in my experience allows me to respond better because I'm just here to understand, not to reply. Seek first to understand before being understood. Right? All right. The second one here, you've alluded to this one, but just focusing, right? Like working on not letting your mind wander as best as you can, right? Stop thinking about that episode of Game of Thrones or whatever you watched last night, right? Just coming back to the conversation, almost like a mindfulness practice, right? And by the way, little hack for you here. Usually it's invisible to the other person when you start mind wandering, right? So when you catch yourself mind wandering, instead of thinking, I did it again, I'm thinking about something else. Instead, think, hey, good for me. I caught myself mind wandering and now I'm bringing it back. And that's kind of the practice right there. Catching when your mind wanders and bringing it back to the thing you're focusing at hand. Right, not to be too redundant, we've certainly circled around curiosity many times today. Right? Just being curious. What if I think to myself, hey, whatever the person is saying, I'm just going to be curious about it. Regardless if I like this person or not, I'm going to be curious about what they have to say. I'm going to approach this conversation with almost a childlike curiosity. What can I learn about this person? What can I understand? What's unique? What's new? What are they saying? Right? So I'm doing this as opposed to categorizing what they're saying as good, bad, judgment. Right? When I'm doing that, it makes me really hard to be present with you. By the way, our brains are geared this way to put things into good, bad categories pretty quickly, which can be translated as putting it into safe, unsafe categories. Right? This partially is how we survived as a human species. Right? So we're trying to work against this instead say, you know what, I'm going to be open. I'm just going to stay curious. All right. The fourth one here is just bringing your empathy to that conversation. Right? What's it like to be the star of their movie? Have you heard that analogy before? That we're all the stars of our own movie. So I'm the star of my movie, and I have co-stars in my movie, close family members, friends, and I have a whole lot of extras in my movie as well. And I hate to break it to you all, but you all are extras in my movie. Right? But if we can remember this is going on for everybody, I can start bringing that empathy. What's it like to be in their movie? And I can be there and present with them. So folks, if you practice this stuff, I can almost guarantee every person here can become a better listener. Like if we take this stuff seriously and put it into action, everybody can become a better listener. And again, I hope you get why this matters. Not only for yourself, in your success in life and in relationships, but for the other people around you. By the way, the social sciences indicate that roughly about 30% of the general population is kind of already naturally good at these type of listening skills. They kind of just do it without having to think about it. And if we related that to the behavioral styles, that would be who? The listeners, right? They kind of naturally show up with this warmth, attentiveness to conversations. 30% of the population, right? And my experience is that about 80% of people think they're within that 30%, right? So again, we don't know what we don't know, right? You might know you're a good listener, and you are a good listener. Still figure out, hey, what are some things that I could sharpen up here, right? You might think you're a good listener and you're a bad listener. So practice this stuff. We don't know what we don't know. All right, so back to our 4 stages of adaptive skill development. So remember, I went from the unconscious incompetent stage, which is that Johari's window, the blind spot. I don't know that I'm not good at this thing, to the conscious competence where it's like, oh, this is the painful stage. I've learned that I'm not good at this particular adaptive skill, and it's had some impact on those around me. To the conscious competence, which is the work stage, which is the stage we're working through right now. Breaking that skill down into its component parts. I practice it over and over again. Then when we do that, we can get to this cool last stage called unconscious competence, where you can just start to do the thing without hardly even trying anymore. Right. And what's the magic word that will get us here? You can all say it together. Practice. Okay? And remember, as we engage in that practice, you're actually changing your brain, that neuroplasticity. But we all know that it's not going to happen just because you went to a leadership course and we quickly went through best practice listening skills. So my challenge to you all, my invitation to you all, is to do something with this. You all are going to have dozens, if not hundreds of opportunities over the next couple weeks to practice this stuff. And so if you're building an action plan for yourself, what I might suggest is, hey, focus on 3 of those behaviors and maybe 1 or 2 mindsets. Don't try to focus on all 9 at once. Right? Take a few and be intentional about that in your conversation. See what it does for you. See what it does for the person that you're speaking with. Experiment with it a bit. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast and listening to a little piece of our live recording of the Managing with Mind and Heart workshop. By the way, if you've ever wondered what some of our live virtual workshops are like, I hope you got a little bit of an idea for it here. Again, I encourage you to consider joining the thousands of other leaders that have participated in this workshop. And to do so, just go to our website, nashconsulting.com, and register for our next live series. All right, peace.